Soft soldered spikes are easy to make, and I'm going to show you how. And I'm not just going to show you one way, I'm going to show you 2 different ways that you can create a really cool spiky effect with your soft soldered jewelry. I'm going to be using copper foil tape. The first step I'm going to do is to measure it around my cabochon. You can use any kind of stone you like for this. I like a nice smooth topped stone for a good effect, and you'll see what I mean by that in a little while. So measure your tape around your object, snip it off. Make sure you leave a little bit of tape so that when you get to the end you can overlap where the tape starts, because you need to have that tape connected for the solder to adhere. Now you're going to peel away the backing of the tape. It is sticky on one side with an adhesive and smooth copper on the other side. And once you start the end, you're going to position it with your stone centered. And then as you pull the tape around your stone, you're going to slowly peel away the backing and press down on the tape with your fingers to adhere it to your stone. Once I have my tape completely on my stone, I'm going to grab my burnishing tool and I'm going to go around all areas of the copper foil tape with a firm pressure, not too hard but not too soft. You want to make sure that you're not pressing too hard that you'll ruin the tape. There's a chance that you can tear the tape, especially if you're using a thinner copper foil tape. Yes, did you know that copper foil tape not only comes in different widths, but it also comes in different thicknesses, and I explain this in my books. So I'm going to continue burnishing that copper foil tape, and then I'm going to inspect it, and I'm going to make sure it looks nice and even. On one side of my stone you could see I made it so the tape is less visible, that's the front, and then on the back I had a little bit of an overlap. So I'm going to take my craft knife and I'm going to very slowly and carefully just slice away the little bit of overlap of tape, and you can see how small the piece was that I took off there. Now my stone is ready to solder. On to the fun part. I have my soldering iron heated up. I have a brush with some liquid flux. I coat all the areas of copper with liquid flux, and then I take my lead-free solder and I give the entire copper area a coating of solder. That's called tinning. Now once I have that base coat of solder on, I will go over it again and I will add a nice raised layer of solder, which is called a bead. So that is a stained glass term. And my next book, after my Broken China Jewelry book, I have a decorative soldering book coming out, and I will explain all of that in detail if you're interested in decorative soldering and taking your soldering to the next level. Now, because I decided to give this piece a really nice beaded edge, I'm taking my time with it. You can see that I'm going over it, making sure it's nice and even. It's hard to hold this shape of stone. Someone had suggested putting tape around an old pair of pliers. That works great. I have these pliers that I only use for soldering because I don't want to get flux on my regular jewelry pliers. So every once in a while, if my stone gets too hot, I'll put it in a little bit of a bath and I'll cool it off, dry it off, and then I'll start again. So I had a wet cloth there and I'm holding that just to touch up where I had a little bit of a bump and I wanted to smooth it out. And you know, in retrospect, after I finished this whole project, I really could have left some texture around the sides of the solder, and you'll see what I mean in the very end when we're all finished. But there you see I have some water, I've got a little bit of soap in there, and I can just pop that in there every once in a while when it gets too hot and then dry it off with a paper towel. So I'm going to inspect it and I can see it still has a little bit of a bump there. I was being a perfectionist. I decided to touch up those areas one last time very quickly. When you first start out in your soldering, you're not worried about doing these types of things. You just want to get the solder on the metal. But now we're going to move on and I'm going to show you the first way that I make spikes on my stone. I pick up a small piece of solder about the size of a grain of rice and I decide where I'm going to place it onto the edge, and you can see I made a small mark on there. It's kind of like just getting it started, making a little base, and I turned down the temperature of my soldering iron a little bit, and if I wouldn't have done that, it would have ran right off. I'm going to pick up a little more solder and watch how slowly I move with this. I'm going to drag that solder in toward the center of my stone so slowly, still dragging it, still dragging it, still dragging it, and there you go. And that comes to such a sharp point. It's like a cat's claw. It's a really cool effect. Now I'm going to turn my stone, I'm going to put a little bit more flux on there, and I'm going to decide where I'm going to put my second spike. And these are inward solder spikes. I'm going to choose right at the bottom there, like opposite, And again, I'm going to put a little bit down to make my base, and I'm going to pick up a little more solder, and you're going to see once again how slowly I move with this. You can't rush it. You have to go as slow as you possibly can until like it runs out of solder and it makes that nice point. And we will go over those points then so they're not so deadly sharp. But that's our first soldered spike technique. And look at that. Isn't that cool? They're perfect spikes. Now I'm going to add my third spike, and I'm going to decide where I'm going to place it on my stone, but I'm going to show you a different technique this time. We're not going to go directly onto the stone with the solder as we did with those last two spikes. For this next technique, we're going to do a foil overlay. Make the foil overlay, I will cut off a small piece of copper foil tape, use scissors to cut it down to a spike shape, and then I'm going to adhere it to my stone. Once I adhere it down, I'm going to burnish it, same steps that we did in the beginning, and then I'm going to add flux, and then I'm going to add solder. And you can see I'm soldering that foil right over the stone. How easy is that? You want to make sure that you camouflage the ends of the tape very neatly into all the other soldering so it's nice and smooth. And you want to also make sure that you put enough solder on the spike, because you don't want to make it so that it gets bumped and that spike, that foil overlay just like peels off or comes off. It shouldn't do that if you have enough solder on there. So you can see I'm building it up. I'm kind of playing with it a little bit to see like where I want the balance of the solder to be, whether I want it to be like over the whole thing or more toward the top. But I still have to add a jump ring, and after I do that, I will probably have to touch up the soldering on the spike again. I'm going to use my soldering pliers to hold the jump ring in place, add some flux and a little bit of solder. I'll hold my iron there just for a moment until that jump ring is attached. Now I can go back to my spike and touch it up a little bit, add a little more solder, smooth it out, and that's our second way to make a spike. So now I'm going to take the tip of my soldering iron and just very carefully touch the end of the first two spikes. We want to get off that really sharp point that was on there. I'm going to go to the edges right at the base of where I put the first two spikes, and I'm going to add just a little bit of solder on there. The purpose for doing that is to continue the spike around the edge of the piece so that it almost looks like a talon or like a claw. And I messed around with it a little bit, and you can see I'm kind of doing like kind of a dotted kind of touch with the end of my soldering iron. I was just giving it a little bit of texture. I did the same thing to the other side, and then I inspected it, and then I kind of thought that I put a little too much on there. So you'll see in a moment, once I look at it, I just melt it off very carefully so that I don't melt the spikes off, but I just smooth it down, and I did the same thing on the other side. And that's our two different types of soldered spikes for soft solder jewelry. But we're not finished. I'm going to give it one last look over, and then I'm going to take it over to my sink, wash it up really well with a drop of dish detergent on a soft fingernail brush under running water, dry it completely, and now we're going to add a black patina. As you can see, I have an old plate that I only ever use for patina, along with a paintbrush that I only ever use for black patina. I'm going to pour just a tiny little bit out onto my plate. Never pour it into the lid of the bottle. Always use a separate container. So make sure your project is nice and clean and dry. And then I'm going to use my brush, and I put a rubber glove on. Also, you always want to wear safety glasses when you work with any kind of chemicals, and also with soldering. Safety glasses, a mask, fume extractor. Look down below in the description, and I'll put links to all those things. I'm going to use the brush to go around all silver areas of the piece until it's coated with black patina. You can see it instantly will turn black. I'm going to use a little bit of a rubbing, brushing motion to make sure I get in all the little areas. Make sure you get inside the jump ring as well and on the back. And then I'm going to blot it with a paper towel and set it aside until it's completely dry. Once it's dry, I'm going to wash it up again with a fingernail brush, a little bit of soap and water. You can see I scrub it up, rinse it, dry it with a paper towel. Once it's completely dry, I'm going to grab my steel wool. Make sure you work over a paper towel because it makes a lot of dirt, and I'm going to buff it with the steel wool. I'm going to remove some of the black patina, and I'm going to bring out some of that silver. We're going to give it a good antique finish. I buff it with steel wool. I move in all different directions. And if the piece is large enough, I work in a circular motion. But you're going to just buff it until you are pleased with the finish. Rinse it off, dry it off, and then I have a little bit of a polishing cloth. I'm going to just buff it up and give it a nice shine. And that's our project. you saw two different ways of making spikes. Which do you like better? Leave me a comment below and let me know. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to hit the little bell next to the subscribe button so you can get notified when I release a new video. Now here are two different options for hanging it. You can use a cord, you can use a chain. Which do you like better? This pendant is also unisex. It can be for a man or a woman. It has a great kind of goth look to it. I love that it has kind of a fantasy vibe. So let me know what you think. Leave me a comment below. Like I said, I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you next time. Don't forget, my new book, The Broken China Jewelry Book, will be released in August. Bye, guys.